joined the prison service in 1991 and went to Shepton in 97, stayed there till 2013. I was there when it closed. I was sent to Shepton as a senior officer. I then was promoted to custodial manager, and then I was doing duty governor duties. Generally start about either 7:30 or 8 o'clock. Go in, check with the orderly officer of the day, make sure the staffing was okay, attend the governor's briefing at 9 o'clock, where we'd look at the last 24 hours, see whether there've been any issues in our prison or around the estate, look at the next 24, any potential problems. Governor's briefing then, so you had representative from every area of the prison. You'd have someone from healthcare, someone from education department, regimes, through care, all in one place at one time, just generally looking at the state of the jail. That used to go on for about half an hour probably. Then you'd go out to whatever your job was for the day. So I don't know if you're aware of the rank structure. You have operational OSGs, operational support grades. They do things like open and shut the front gate, post, comms room, radio, that kind of stuff. Then obviously you have the officers running the wings, looking after the prisoners. You then have a layer of senior officers. You've probably got 4 on duty a day, who one will be the orderly officer of the day, one will be in charge of the residential areas, possibly one in the gym, and then you have a layer above them who were originally principal officers, then renamed as custodial managers, and they have a bigger area of responsibility. So you'll have someone in charge of regimes, somebody in charge of residential, somebody in charge of through care, and then above those you'll have a governor grade. So that's kind of the layer. So as a CM, as a custodial manager, I'm going in to make sure that I've got an SO on duty, basically everything's running. If we've got any, I don't know, audits expected, you're checking paperwork, you may run the adjudications, all those different things that just go on day in, day out. Weekdays are slightly different than weekends, because weekdays prisoners go to work, everybody goes to work, whereas weekends you might only have sort of cleaners, kitchen, the gym would be working. And that's it really. You're just looking to anticipate whether there's going to be any issues, or looking to see what's happened in the last sort of 24 hours really. And then dealing with anything. If you have an incident, then you deal with whatever comes up. Yes, yeah, absolutely. There are times when you are relatively sure something is going to happen or has happened, and you're kind of waiting for it. There's that sense of impending doom almost, like maybe you've got drunk prisoners, maybe you've had a fight, maybe somebody's been assaulted, somebody's died, all those different things. So that brings an unsettling feeling across the whole prison. So that makes you feel a bit uneasy, because if things aren't running in the normal regime, you've got to anticipate what could go wrong, who's in danger, what might be the next thing. So you're always kind of looking. As a prison officer, you're never not watching people. You're always looking for clues about what might be going to happen next.
Always having to read people. Huh?
Oh yeah, always. Yeah, it's a standing joke. We go into one of our reunions now, and literally you could have the entire staff sat with their backs against the wall, because nobody ever wants to stand without their back against a wall, because you don't in prison. It's not safe. And that like the walkways, you would never walk down the middle of the wing. You always walk with something above your head. So it's that. I mean, 99 times out of 100, probably, no, everything was running fine, but you could feel if something wasn't. There's a definite air. Yeah, I would say, because generally Shepton particularly, I mean, I've worked in a few prisons, but Shepton, we ran a very calm, secure regime. We only held life sentence prisoners. They had an awful lot to lose. If things started to go wrong for them, if they were fighting, they're caught with drugs, any of those stuff, it could put another 10 years on their sentence. So they couldn't afford for those sort of things to happen. And that, because we ran a fully integrated regime. We were the only prison in the country that ran a full rule regime. So sex offenders and normal prisoners all in together. And actually we worked very hard for about 5 years to make that safe. So it was 9 times out of 10 a very calm, quiet place. But you only need someone to die of natural causes, even. It doesn't even need to be a suicide. And that rocks everybody a little bit. And staff as well. If you've got a member of staff that is suddenly, if a member of staff dies, again, of natural causes at home and something happened, that knocks everybody, because it's such a small environment. Everybody feels for everybody else, if you like. When I was at Bristol, my nan died. As nans do, you know, bless her, loved her to pieces, and dealt with all of that. And then generally, if you're sending an escort out to something that might be a little bit emotive, you generally send a female officer if you can, because it kind of helps a little bit. And I ended up sitting in this funeral, cuffed to this guy, crying, the pair of us sitting there. He's blubbing for his mum, I'm blubbing for my nan. Got back to work, got called up to the governor's office thinking, oh, God, I'm in trouble. To get an apology saying, we should never have put you in that position. You've just had a bereavement. I don't know whose idea it was to send you. I went, no, it's absolutely fine. It doesn't matter at all. And then that prisoner came to find me, and he went and just sat and chatted to me, because he knew I understood exactly how he felt. Empathize in different ways, maybe. Locked up quite a lot of guys who I don't necessarily think should have been in prison, or ones that you feel that had anything changed slightly, it could have been any one of us there. Yeah. That's not sympathize, empathize at certain points, I would say. Oh yeah, absolutely. I went, when Shepton closed, I went to Earlstoke for another 6 months at a higher grade. And the only thing really that stopped me carrying on was the travelling.
Really?
But yeah, I did 25 years. I wouldn't have done 25 had I not found it interesting and rewarding. Fascinating job. No.
No.
In a nutshell, I think prisons actually mirror community more than people realize. I think a prison has to operate as a mini town, if you like. So you have got everything on site that you would expect to have, you know, from a shop to a gym to a laundry, blah, 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 and all of these different elements working together. And I think, not in all, but in a lot of prisons, you have the respect of communities. There's never enough prison staff, for a start. You're always outnumbered, I don't know, 40 or 50 to 1. So you have to be able to talk to people. You have to be able to communicate. And I think that mirrors society. I think there are very, very few true representations in the media of what a prison is really like. Possibly Time, that was on recently, Stephen Graham. I think that was very good. That was quite realistic. Screw, that's been on recently, has got the humour. I mean, the rest of it, in my opinion, is baloney, but they've got the humour, the staff humour and the banter that goes on. I think the problem we've got is, like you say, everything's behind a wall and nobody really knows what's going on. And there were, back in the 80s, there were quite a few documentaries made about prisons. And then you had, you know, the riots and all that kind of thing, and that kind of shut down again. So I don't think people really, unless you've been in, you don't really understand what it's like to work in a prison. You would forget where you were sometimes. You know, of an evening, if I had time, I'd wander around the wings, chat to prisoners, might play a game of cards, and sit and have conversations with them. You know, if it was a sunny day and I'd finished everything I felt I needed to do, I'd sit on the exercise yard on a bench and have a cup of tea and a chat. Because actually that's dynamic security as well. You know, you need to build relationships with people to ensure that something like that works.
And
So it's an
mutual respect.
interesting mutual, absolutely mutual respect. Yeah. My rule, my personal rule, and as well, going back at cross-sex posting, so females into male prisons was a new thing when I joined. There were very few cross-sex postings. By the time I got to Shepton, it was more common, but still not common. There's still not a great deal of women in men's jails. And my rule was always, if I'm talking face to face to you, my name is Laura, you can call me Laura, that's absolutely fine. If you want to attract my attention from a distance, I'm Mom, I'm Mrs. Miller, or I'm whatever rank I am at that point. You can shout that, that's fine, and I'll respond. Don't shout my first name. And a lot of the blokes used to, when I first got to Shepton, first of all, when I was posted to Shepton, I was pregnant as well, which was quite entertaining because it was, oh, we got a new female senior officer and she's pregnant. What are we going to do with her? And I would say they're less likely to be kicking my head in tomorrow if yesterday they were calling me Laura. You know, let's think about relationships and things like that. And I worked, rightly or wrongly, don't know, right up until I went off to have my baby on the wings quite happily, no issues whatsoever. And it's about respect. So the interesting thing is now, quite sometimes I'll go into our jail and someone will say, oh, there was a prisoner down here asking about you. And I always think that shows respect, because actually and I always say, ring me if I'm home, I'll come down and say hello. You know, I'm not, I quite like chatting to ex-prisoners because I want to know what they've done with their lives and how they are and how their families are and that kind of thing. And I don't think you get that if you've not had the respect in the first place. And you bump into them from time to time, you know, in normal life, especially when we worked in Bristol. You might be locking them up one day and bumping into them in the town centre the next week. So think very hard about your own personality.
Mm-hmm.
Got to have a sense of humour. You've got to be able to talk to people. You've got to be non-judgmental, because your job is not to put a person in prison. They're already in prison. Your job is to deal with the person that's there. So you've got to move past those things. I would say it's different than when we were there, even in the, 8-9 years now. I think prisons have changed. I think there's a lot less control. When I joined early 90s, there was still quite a lot of ex-military staff in there. So you had the discipline from the military side, and then other people coming in kind of softened that, but you had a really good balance. Retention rate in the prison now in the service is poor, I would say. I know there's a young lad, probably your age, that is working at Bristol and is temporarily in charge of a wing. He's only been there about 18 months. Wow. Because you've not got the senior staff. A lot of people were brought on. There was a thing called VEDS, which was Voluntary Exit Departure Scheme, just before Shepton closed, and then when all the jails shut again, and they basically targeted the expensive staff. So anybody with an amount of time in, and therefore quite a good pension, were offered really good packages to leave. So it'd be interesting if you can find out, somewhere like Guy's Marsh might be able to tell you what the average amount of time their staff have actually been in, because at Shepton you were looking at sort of 15 to 20 years. I was, even probably till the day I left, I was still one of the junior screws. So yeah, it was a job you did. Good job, good pension. But yeah, if you're thinking about doing it now, you need to be quite sure about your own self and your own self values, I'd say, because it's quite stressful. It's quite a stressful job, and stress from areas you don't expect as well, not necessarily confrontation. You've got all the your report writing for a start. If you're report writing on sex offenders and looking at what they've done to society or children or whatever, you've got to deal with that. So there's lots more to it than just prisoners on a wing. I think it's great. Yeah. I love it. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a shame it closed. It was the top performing prison in the country when it shut. But I think it's brilliant. I think the more we use it, the better, because it is real social history. You know, chuck some mattresses on those beds and we could reopen that place. Nothing's really changed. So for people to see what a prison is like, whenever I'm talking to people, I say, oh my God, you know, this must have shut years ago. I'm like, no, 8 years ago, this is exactly how it looked. It was a bit warmer and cleaner, but this is how it was. So I think it's brilliant. I think people should see it. It's good for people to come in, to be able to ask questions. And it's a beautiful building. The architecture, I think, is stunning. So just to get people in to see that is lovely. Had you asked me when I worked there,
Yeah.
I'd have probably said no, don't be silly.
Okay.
But so many strange things have happened since it's been closed, that I think possibly there are things I can't explain. The
What's the
first night I went in on a
Oh.
haunted happenings do, it's just the weirdest. And in the morning, Graham said, what was it like then? And I said, well, either somebody was in there hiding and I counted everybody in and counted everybody out, or there's some spooky shit going on. Because there was just weird stuff. Lights coming on where there's no power is a good example. I mean, during working prison, there were people that had weird experiences. My dad had strange things happen to him. Loads of people did. But you'd always kind of laugh it off because, you know, we're a working prison. We really don't want to get too involved in that kind of talk. But I just think there's some sort of weird energy in there now. I've got lovely orbs floating around. I've seen shadows I've seen shadow people walking across the threes on B-Wing. And I've stood there and looked at them thinking, I know what I can see, but I shouldn't be able to see that. That's not quite right. In working times, things would occasionally happen that you would try and explain away. So I had an office, if you look at the front of the governor's house, and go into the right-hand corner where the wooden white staircase is that goes up, I had an office right at the very, very top of there.
Okay.
Now, at night, once you've locked down the prison, I could put myself in that office with gates between me and the rest of the prison that nobody else could open because I could double lock myself in. And I would work up there at night. And regularly, it's probably a bit over the top, but often I would feel as though somebody was stood behind me, and you have that kind of feeling that somebody's looking over your shoulder. And then I used to get a bell ring, a very tiny, tingly little bell would sound to the right of me. Often, bizarrely often, to the point where in the end I would go up and fetch my work and take it somewhere else in the prison because I didn't like it. It was uncomfortable. And then as the history, once we'd closed and the history started came out, turns out that was an old chapel that was used as a chapel at different times, and they would call people to the chapel with a little tiny tingly bell. I was like, yeah, I've heard that. So weird things like that. I had no knowledge about what that area was used for, and it only happened when I was up there on my own. During the day, it was a busy environment, but if I was on nights and went up there by myself, something about the room was different. And little things like that, you know, things turn lights on and off, the doors creaking. But there's a bit on A-Wing on the threes, there's a slight part of the corridor that if you stand on it, it will creak. If you step over it, it won't. But you can be on A-Wing with the entire wing locked up and be the only person and hear the floor creak. And as a member of staff, you never step on it because at night you don't want to make a noise. You want everybody to stay asleep. That's perfect. Nobody awake, but it would creak. Just odd stuff like that. I think people, yeah, I think there are things happening. I think there are some odd things going on in there, but I think people assume because it was a prison that it's all bad. If that makes sense. There are some odd things that I can't explain, but I think people want it to be a murderer or the craze. Everybody wants the craze to be in there. But I think they also need to look at the fact there's that piece of ground has a history from before the prison. What was there before? You know, if there's something there, are we getting energy from other places? So yeah, I don't think it's as eerie as people like to think, but I do think there are some odd things that go on. And I've always, you often don't have a torch in the right place at the right time. So you're used to walking around there at night. As a night orderly officer, you'd spend your entire 8-9 hour shift wandering because you've got absolutely nothing else to do if it's all quiet, either on your own or with another member of staff. And there would be times where you'd get to a corner and think, I don't want to go around there because it doesn't feel quite right. And it's not prisoners you're worried about, it's other things, which is silly. But yeah, so I don't think it's as dark. I think people want it to be dark because it's a prison. If it was a country house, they'd want it to be ladies in floaty dresses. I think people project what they want onto a building. No, unless you've actually spent some time inside a prison, you have no idea. Everything in a prison is kind of along the same lines as it would be outside. And the same humor, the laughter is unbelievable in a prison because people have to keep their spirits up, literally. So the humor, nowhere near as dark. One of the best things I ever did, I went off on a bit of a tangent about, so I was running the sex offender treatment program. That was my unit. And we were spending hundreds of thousands of pounds on treatment programs. And my point was, if a prisoner can't say openly that they're gay, what else are they admitting to? We're wasting time and money. So I went on a bit of a tangent about integrated regimes. That's how it all started, about bringing prisoners in and making it safe for them to be openly gay, blah, 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 blah. And that went on, and then I added all the other protected characteristics, and I had all sorts of stuff going on. But the best thing I did about a year before we closed was brought down a choir called Sing Out Bristol. Google them. They're a gay choir from Bristol. They all turned up in their high heels and their bloats and their feather boas. And we had them in the chapel in Gay Pride Week, and we had a show. And we didn't want to lock up. We didn't want it to finish. We had to lock up because prison has to be locked up at a certain time. All prisons are locked up at 8 o'clock. And it's like, but who'd know if we didn't actually? That's the best night. People stood up, blokes stood up, singing, clapping, singing Over the Rainbow in a prison, literally raising the roof. Amazing. So to be able to explain that to somebody, they're like, no, I don't believe it. I did. When for quite a couple of years, actually, we had obviously prisoners gain qualifications. That's the whole point. And some of them were training to become PT instructors, and they needed to train females. Obviously, we've got no female prisoners, so some of the female staff would be trained by prisoners. So my lunch hour, I would go to the gym for an hour, and there was one particular prisoner who would then absolutely beast the hell out of me for an hour, fittest I have ever been, because he needed to get the qualification. And because there were so few female staff, some of us were asked, whether we'd do it. And weirdest thing, because he was in charge for an hour, and you're never going to give up, obviously, unless I throw up or passed out. But and he was a big black guy as well. So there was this kind of mutual respect of like, I know you can make me do anything you like for an hour and there's nothing I can do about it. But when I put my uniform back on, it's me again. That's it. And it was, and everybody knew what was going on. So it was kind of like I'd walk back onto the wing after lunch, been at not going to waddle because, my legs are really hurting, and saunter past going, it's not like that hurt at all. And they're just snorts of laughter because I've still got sweat dripping off the side of my face, So people, explain that to somebody, and they're like, what, a prisoner? Well, yeah, because I'm hoping he's one of the ones that I say shouldn't have been there, in my opinion. I'm hoping he's running a gym. So I'd love to Google him. I'm not going to, but running a gym somewhere, because we've given him a qualification that he can use, but he can only get the qualification with cooperation from other people. I won all sorts of awards for this work by not intentionally, but the process that I kind of started kicking up kind of caught on a bit. And I had a secretary who was called Darren, who was the best secretary I'd ever had, who was a prisoner. He was organising just about all of it. And when I really lost the plot, because then I had to go and receive some awards, Minister of Prisons, all that kind of stuff, and they wouldn't let me take him. And I was like, well, he's done as much of the work, if not more, than I've done. You're going to put me on the stage. As far as I'm concerned, you should be licensing him for the day and he should be coming with me.
Good for you.
But people don't see that. And
No.
those sorts of things go on all the time.
That's a
So
damn
they're
shame.
not anywhere near as dark as people think. It's a shame, really. It's a shame. You know, people are in prison for all sorts of reasons. They just are. They're in there. They've done something. They're being punished for it. And then they're going to come out and hopefully come out as better people. End of.